Okay, now in this unit, we're going to be moving to what we call the perfect squared. Now we talked about factoring before. Let me come over and take a look at over here. We talked about factoring before. Then factoring, I had something. I remember we covered something like x squared plus 6x plus 9. We learned how to factor that. Remember, we would look for an x figured. Two numbers are multiplied equals 9, added equal to 6, and we will end up getting, so multiplied is equal to 9. When I add my numbers equal to 6, we found that it was 3 and 3. Funny thing is that we will end up factoring this as x plus 3 squared. Now we call this a perfect squared because when we factor it, when we put this in parentheses, we get the same parentheses twice. So now what I'm going to ask you guys here, first of all, says find a value that completes the squared and then rewrite it as a perfect square. Okay, so that's what I have here on our notes. Two things. We have to complete the square. For completing the square, you guys see this empty space here. That there's a number there. We have to put the number that completes the square. Now, I'm gonna write it. I'm gonna finish writing it as a perfect square. So what I'm going to do, first of all, my first term here, my leading coefficient, my number at the very front should be a 1, which it is. Second thing I'm gonna do is this number in the centered, negative 18. I'm gonna think of what's the half of negative 18. The half of that will be negative 9. I'm even gonna write it down here because I'm going to use it, right? The half of a negative 18 is negative 9. Now, my question is, what's negative 9 squared? So negative 9 times negative 9, I get 81. So that's the number that goes here. So if I ask you, complete the squared, I'm just asking what's the number that goes there. In this case, it's just 81. And the reason why we call it complete the squared is because if I was to factor, right, if I was to give you guys the quadratic x squared minus 18x plus 81, and I wanted to factor this, I will end up getting x minus 9 all square. Right? For some of you that are like, where's that? All right, think of two numbers that multiplied equals 81. When I add them is equal to negative 18, you will think negative 9 and negative 9. All right, so when I factor this, I get the same parentheses twice. So that's what we call it, a square. So two things. Pay attention to what I did. I did two things here. For your homework, if I just ask you complete the squared, just type in 81. That's all I'm looking for. Now, in your homework, if I said rewrite this as a perfect squared, I'm expecting x minus 9 all squared. Now on our homework, because we cannot type in the exponents, I will expect you to write x minus 9, that parentheses, twice, right? X minus 9 squared, that means I have the parentheses twice. Do notice that I included parentheses, it's all together, okay? So no spaces in between, all together. All right, let's take a look at question number 2. Now, I see the number, the first number, the leading coefficient. We call it leading because it's the leader, right? The first number, it's a 1, so I'm good. Then the second number, I see a plus 28 in the center. And then I ask myself, what's the half of plus 28? And I'm going to think positive 14. I'm even going to write the plus 14 there. Now, what's 14 times 14? 14 times 14 is 196. So for me to complete the squared, I will say 196. That's it. And I said complete the square because if I was to factor that, I get x plus 14, I mean z, in this case the letter z plus 14 square. The way I will type that, obviously make sure z plus 14 and z plus 14. Notice I'm typing my parentheses twice, right? That's what the square means. So that should help you in this type of homework. Now, completing the square, we're going to be able to use this. We're going to be able to use this to solve for the variable. All right, when it says solve each equation by completing the square, I'm going to use completing the square. But I'm looking at what's the value of x that will make this statement true. Okay, I want the x's by themselves. So the plus 15, I'm going to move it to the other side as a minus 15. Right? Don't forget to switch the sign. So now I have x squared minus 10x, let me leave a space, equals -9. Right? 6 minus 15, that's where I got the -9 from. Okay, so I left the space. Notice on the left side, I had everything with an x, everything with the letter. Next step, make sure the leading coefficient, the number at the very front, is 1. If it is not 1, we're going to deal with that in a minute. Okay, so I'm good right now. Then I look at the -10x, right? And then I ask myself, what's the half of -10? In my case, -5. Right? The half of -10 is -5. What's -5 squared? Right? -5 times -5 is +25. So let me add 25 to both sides. Right? When there's an equal sign, I'm going to add the same thing to both sides. And the reason why I added 25 on the left side, because x squared minus 10x plus 25 all factored will give me x minus 5 squared. So notice how on the left side, I completed the square. On the right side of the equal side, -9 plus 25, that's 16. Right, that's just simple numbers. -9 plus 25, 16. Now I want to get rid of the square. I want the left side to just be x minus 5. I want to get rid of the square. So think about it. How do you undo an exponent? In this case, the way I'm going to undo an exponent, I'm going to do the square root. So in this case, what's the square root of 16? Let me include positive or -4. Right? +4, right? The square root of 16 is 4, but also -4. I am including both cases, positive and -4. Okay, so I want x by itself. This -5, I'm going to move it to the right side. So I'm going to have x by itself equals +5. Notice I changed the sign. It was -5, so I'm going to put it as a +5. +5 plus or -4. I'm going to have two answers. The way I'm going to do this, on the 5 plus or -4, for my first answer, I'm going to look at the plus sign, so 5 plus 4. For the second answer, I'm going to look at the minus sign, so 5 minus 4. My two answers, when I complete this, when I'm going to solve this, my two answers are going to be 9 and 1. 5 plus 4 and 5 minus 4. All right, so some of you might be thinking, well, what does that mean? What does the solution mean? Go back to the initial question. X squared minus 10x plus 15 is equal to 6. Instead of x, use 9 or 1, and then you will get a true statement. What do I mean with true statement? True statement is something like 3 plus 1 is equal to 4. Right? That's a true statement. If you use any other number besides 9 and 1, if you want to try 0, any number, you're going to get a false statement. What do I mean with false statement? 3 plus 1 is equal to 7. Right? Only 9 and 1 give you a true statement. Any other number will give you a false statement. That's what we mean with solve. What are the possible values of x that will give me a true statement? In this case, 9 and 1. All right, let's take a look at question number 4. I'm going to be working up into number 6 today. So I want everything with the letter on the left side. So this -2, I'm going to move it to the other side as a +2. So I get 9a squared minus 18a, let me leave a space, is equal to -8. Okay. Now my first number should be 1, but it's a 9. So what I'm going to do, because I want it to be a 1, let me divide everything by 9. So that gives me a squared minus 2a, let me leave a space, is equal to -8 over 9. It's fine. It's okay to have fractions. I'm just looking on the left side. I want to complete the square. So I look at the first number should be a 1, which it is. My second number is a -2. So I ask myself, what's the half of -2? It's a -1. What's -1 squared? Well, 1. So that means I'm going to add 1 to both sides. Now, interesting on the right side, I want the 1 as a fraction. So let me erase that 1. And I'm going to write it as 9 over 9. I wanted a fraction. I want the 9 at the bottom because I know when I add fractions, I need to have common denominator. Okay. So if I was to factor the left side, a squared minus 2a plus 1, I will end up getting a minus 1 all squared. Right, this is the reason why we call this completing the square, because I get a square. Now, on the right side, -8 over 9 plus 9 over 9. I know it's a fraction, so it's a 9 at the bottom. -8 plus 9 gives me a 1 on the top. And the way I'm going to undo the exponent, I'm going to do square roots. So I'm going to do, let me use green, the square root here, the square root here, and the square root here. I'm going to square root everything. So on the left side, I get a minus 1 equals, I know when I do the square root of numbers, right? The square root of 1, the square root of 9, I have to consider positive or negative answers. Think of this as two separate square roots, right? Looking on the top, I'm going to have a fraction. On the top, what's the square root of 1? 1. At the bottom, what's the square root of 9? Well, 3. So I have that a minus 1 is equal to plus or minus 1 over 3. So I'm going to say that a is equal to positive 1 plus or minus 1/3. Notice that all I did was the -1, I moved it over as a positive 1, right? See what I did? Okay. Combine your answers though. My 1, let me erase this 1, and let me write this as 3 over 3. So my two answers here are going to be 4 over 3 and 2 over 3. Right, I kept the 3 at the bottom because they were fractions, a common denominator. I went 3 plus 1 and 3 minus 1. Simplify your fractions if you can. It's okay to have the big number on the top. Now, the way we're going to type fractions, I'm going to expect you guys to go 4 backslash 3 and then 2 backslash 3, right? 4 over 3 and 2 over 3. All right, let's do a couple more examples. Let's take a look. Question number 5. What I'm going to do to begin with, this minus 24, let me move it over as a plus 24. So that gives me 10x squared minus 20x, let me leave a space in between, is equal to 30. I want my first number to be a 1. So in this case, let me divide everything. I'm going to divide everything by 10. So that gives me 1x squared minus 2x. Let me leave a space. It's equal to 3. Right? 30 divided by 10 is 3. I want to factor the left side. That's why I was leaving the space there. My first number is a 1, which is good. Then I ask myself, what's the half of negative 2? Well, negative 1. Notice I always go with a half. And what's negative 1 squared? Well, 1, right? Negative 1 times negative 1 will give me 1. So let me add 1 to both sides. So that means that on the left, I have x minus 1 all squared, right? I completed the squared is equal to 4. Because 3 plus 1, that's 4. I'm going to do the square root to both sides because that's how I undo exponents. So I'm going to get that x minus 1, it's equal to positive or negative 2. When you do the square root of a number, you have to consider positive or negative. For space purpose, let me rewrite that up here. X minus 1 is equal to plus or minus 2. Okay, so I want the x by itself, so the minus 1, I'm going to move it over. So I get that x is equal to positive 1 plus or minus 2. Notice I switched the sign on the 1. So my two answers are going to be 3 and negative 1. Now the word and, when you type in your answer, you don't have to type it in. I already have it in there. I just want you guys to do 3 and negative 1. Okay, let's take a look at one last example. The minus 88, I'm going to move it to this other side as a plus 88. So that gives me x squared plus 10x, let me leave a space in there, equals 96. My leading coefficient, the number at the very front, is 1, so I'm good. I have x squared plus 10x. So what's the half of 10? Let me think. 5, positive 5. I'm even going to write it because I know I'm going to use that value. 5. Now what's 5 squared? 25. So that means I have to add 25 to both sides. The left side of the equal sign becomes a perfect squared. X plus 5 all squared equals, now 96 plus 25 is 121. Do the square root on each side. So I know on the left side I'm going to get x plus 5 because I'm going to undo the square. Now, what's the half of 121? I mean, not the half, the square root. What's the square root of 121? I hope you say positive or negative 11. Remember that I did the square root on both sides. So I'm going to say that x is equal to negative 5 plus or minus 11. Right? Don't forget to switch the sign on the 5, right? So negative 5 plus or minus 11. So my two solutions will be 6 and negative 16. Right? Negative 5 plus 1, that's how I got the 6. Negative 5 minus 11, that's how I got the negative 16. You will have, when you're solving, you will have two answers. So make sure you have two answers.